Hello everyone. All right, we're back. I'm going to have to start from the beginning of your PSP image capture chapter because last week I realized that the volume wasn't recorded. So if you can remember, we discussed that your digital book is broken down into objectives. All right, so this is objective 1 through 5, and this is objective 6 through 10. All right, you also have a lot of key terms in this particular chapter. So I'm not going to go over them, but you need to define them. Some of them should be kind of reviews, but there are some newer terms that you will see in this chapter. All right, so this particular slide starts with objective number 1. From your book, objective 1 says, describe the basic construction of a PSP cassette and imaging plate. So when we're looking at this, your CR cassette, it kind of looks like one of our conventional radiography cassettes, like our film screen cassettes. And I said last week that I wanted to show you the difference between the two, but of course I'm not there today, so I'll have to show you the next time that I see you. So the cassette itself consists of what they consider a durable, lightweight plastic material, and it's backed by a thin sheet of aluminum. And the purpose of that aluminum is to help absorb some of the X-rays. Instead of intensifying screens inside, because of our film screen cassettes have intensifying screens on each side when you open it up, instead of those, there's an anti-static material. It's usually made of felt, and that actually protects our PSP plate against not only static electricity buildup, but also dust collection and mechanical damage. When I talk about mechanical damage, as these plates are placed into the reader, the PSP plate itself is extracted. So it's pulled in and out of the cassette. So that felt material actually assists with some damage that that could happen as a result of being mechanically extracted. All right, your imaging plate, again, is going to take the place of our radiographic film that we would have used in the film screen world, and it's capable of storing our image formed by our incident X-ray photons. And it does that storage by exciting the phosphors within the plate. All right, in order to get those out, so we form the latent image by exciting the phosphors. In order to get our manifest image out, the reader is going to extract that plate and release that stored light. All right, and it's going to convert it into an electrical signal, which will then be digitized, and we will see that image on our screen. All right, our systems, here we're talking about more of a cassette-based system. We're talking about CR readers for those of you that have had the opportunity to work with CR readers. They differ from conventional radiography, and we call conventional radiography, we're talking about film screen, in the fact that the cassette is light proof. It's a light proof container, and it, of course, protects the imaging plate from light, and of course handling, because we don't actually want to handle the PSP plate itself. All right, here's an image of what your typical CR cassette kind of looks like on the left. This is, I think this is a Fuji brand. Um, And on the right, we have the reusable imaging plate. So that's our reusable film that's extracted each time our plate goes into the reader. All right, as I mentioned previously, the cassette is similar to cassettes used in conventional film screen radiography. They're lightweight, they're plastic, very durable. Durable meaning they last a long time. unless they're damaged. They're backed with lead or aluminum, and that helps or assists with cleaning up or preventing some of the backscatter. And of course, it has that anti-static material inside, that felt material, to protect from dust, mechanical damage, and static electricity buildup. All right, if we were to break this cassette apart, this is what the insides of it would look like. Again, you'd be able to see the aluminum backing, you'd be able to see the anti-static or felt type material, and then of course, the last image on the right is the cassette itself. All right, the imaging plate is of course the place where our latent image is going to be formed. And if you remember back to Physics 1 maybe, or maybe even your intro class, your latent image is that invisible image that is formed that we eventually have to get out, and then it becomes our manifest image. So this is basically the construction of that PSP plate that we're talking about that gets extracted mechanically once we place it in the reader. So it's basically a thin sheet of plastic, and it's composed of several different layers, and these are the layers here. Similar to layers of an intensifying screen. Um, an intensifying screen, again, is found in our film screen cassettes. You don't have to know about the intensifying screens because it's no longer on the registry, but I will find a video that for you all to look at so that you can see exactly what I'm talking about when I say intensifying screens. So again, the construction is, it starts with a protective layer, and then the next layer is the phosphor layer. Then we have a light reflective layer, conductive layer, support layer, a light shielding layer, and a backing layer. And then of course on the back side, or even sometimes on the spine, we have a barcode label or barcode ID type label to identify who the actual image belongs to, and of course what type of image it's going to be for processing purposes. All right, now we're going to go into objective number 2. And per your book, objective number 2 was to describe the purpose of each layer of the imaging plate. All right, so the first layer we said was a protective layer, and is basically a thin layer of plastic that protects the phosphors. The next layer is your phosphor layer, or your active layer. It is basically the heart of the plate, and it contains the phosphors. Usually those phosphors are made of barium fluoro halide family, and they're europium activated as well. All right, so this is where your latent image is going to be captured or trapped. It's going to be trapped in this phosphor layer. All right, the next layer is your reflective layer. And of course, when we talk about reflect, it's going to reflect that light that's going to be released during the reading phase. So as we put it in the processor and it's being read, it's going to reflect that light towards our photo detectors and our photo multiplier tube during that scanning process. All right, the next layer is your conductive layer. All right, your conductive layer basically is responsible for grounding the plate, and it's going to assist in reducing static electricity that would cause artifact type problems on our films. All right, it's also going to assist in absorbing the light that is produced within the cassette, and it increases or assists with increasing the sharpness of our image. All right, your next layer is your color layer. So some of our newer plates, and I say newer plates, but CR is really older technology that's probably about to be obsolete here soon. But some of the what we would consider newer plates have a color layer sandwiched in between the base layer or the support layer and the phosphor layer, which is the active layer, to help reflect and absorb some of that light as well. All right, your support layer is your base layer that all of the other layers sit on top of. So it basically provides the plate with support or rigidity. All right, makes it not as flimsy as it would be if we didn't have the support layer. All right, and then we have the backing layer. All right, and your backing layer protects the back of your IP plate or your cassette. All right, there is another layer that I don't recall going over um, in this construction, but it would fit um, in here between the support layer and the backing layer, and that's that light shielding layer. All right, as you can see, it is on this particular image right here. All right, the light shielding layer. Your light shielding layer basically, it prevents excessive light from erasing the cassette. All right, so that is your light shielding layer. All right, and this is all the layers together. So again, it starts with the protective layer. Then we have our phosphor layer, which traps those electrons or our latent image. Then we have the light reflective layer, conductive layer, support layer, light shielding layer, and backing layer. You have to know what all the layers are and also their function within the PSP plate itself. All right, last but not least, we have the barcode layer. All right, in the barcode layer, all PSP plates are going to contain a barcode layer. That's basically going to help us identify not only who the plate belongs to patient-wise, but also what exam should be on the plate. So basically, when we scan the patient's cassette, we'll scan the barcode, and the barcode is going to basically say that, hey, this cassette belongs to John Doe, and this is going to go into his PHS file, etc. So the barcode layer is scanned. We can scan it before we image a patient, or we can scan it after we image the patient. And again, it's going to ensure that the patient's images are going to be able to be recalled from the archive. And when we talk about archive, we're talking about the PACS system once it's being processed. So if the plate is never scanned, the barcode is never scanned, even if you have already taken an image on it, then the processor itself will not be able to process the image because it needs to be able to connect the particular image to a specific patient. So the barcode must be scanned in order to read out the information that's on it. All right. Another thing that some of our barcode is kind of near the barcode, or it can be on the face of the plate. Um, it's also going to assist the tech with orientation of the cassette. Typically, when we x-ray our patients, there'll either be like a little color bar or maybe a sticker on it that's going to tell you that when you, well, it should tell you, or you should know that when you x-ray the patient, it needs to be in this orientation in order for the image to present correctly, meaning not sideways and not upside down. So here is an example of what the barcode looks like, and this is a Fuji cassette. There are other types of cassettes, but we would scan this, and then also um, there's usually a color, and I can't, let me see if I could find one. I'll go back to this original um, image up here. All right, this particular sticker on the front is basically telling you the orientation. So when you take this image, if you want, let's say we're doing a chest and you want the chest to present, not upside down, then the cassette needs to be in this particular orientation. Then there would be another like color bar for those of you that are familiar with CR imaging. There's also color bars, and you can't really tell from this particular cassette. The color bar is usually either on the spine or somewhere near the top of the cassette, and then some cassettes actually have arrows as well. I'll try at the end of this presentation to find what I'm talking about on the internet because I don't think that we have it. Actually, it is in a few slides coming up. I'll show you in a second. All right, with regard to the plate construction, in addition to that barcode label being there to assist you or the technologist with orientation, um, if the images, again, are taken with the cassette not appropriately oriented, then you'll need to manipulate it, meaning I'll say flip the image upside down or left to right, etc. If you take the image with the cassette properly oriented, then you'll not have to manipulate the image during post-processing for those orientation errors. I'm probably sure that if anyone's worked with Mr. Casey, then he can probably show you on the CR cassettes when you're at clinic. That's if Eastside has CR still, what I'm talking about, or any other facility that has CR imaging. So just pay attention to basically the orientation sticker and see what happens if you use the cassette in the incorrect orientation. You can always, again, flip it post-processing. However, if you want to avoid that additional step, then you will orient the cassette appropriately. All right, and again, some cassettes, and this is your Kodak, comes with a sticker, which is here on the bottom to tell you the cassette needs to be in this orientation in order for it to present upright. And then some cassettes, I believe this is probably a Fuji cassette. This right here is, when I was in the field, it was like a light green or teal color. All right, that was considered the top of your cassette. So that would need to be oriented properly in order for your image to present properly on the screen. And then again, I said some cassettes have an up arrow as well. So again, your stickers are going to help you, and your color bars are going to help you orient the cassette so that your images aren't upside down or sideways once they appear on the screen. All right, now we're moving on to objective number 3. And objective number 3 was explain the process of photostimulation in the imaging plate. So we're actually talking about acquiring the image, acquiring and forming your image. All right, so acquiring the image in your X-rays hasn't changed in any way. We acquire it the same way as we did with film screen with CR and DR. So basically, the only thing that's changed is the technology itself. All right, the difference between CR and DR and film screen is basically how the exposure is recorded, or basically how the latent image is recorded within the medium that we're using. All right, we're still going to have to position the patient properly. We're still going to have a good technique. We're still going to have to ensure that our image receptor is aligned. We're still going to have that proper distance, etc. So again, the only thing that's changed is the technology that is recording the actual latent image. All right, so again, we're concerned with how the CR images are formed within those PSP plates. So the term PSP, or photostimulable luminescence, is your book definition is a process that occurs in your CR image receptor in which the materials are able to emit light immediately while also emitting light sometime later when exposed to a different light source. So basically, when our PSP plate is exposed to X-rays, the Compton and photoelectric X-ray interactions that occur within the outer shell electrons within that PSP plate sends those electrons into what we consider an excited state. So we're going all the way back to the beginning of physics. All right, and that's going to result in basically unstable electrons. All right, some of those electrons, after being stimulated, they will immediately return back to their ground state or their stable state on their own. And the remaining electrons are going to basically be trapped in our active layer of your PSP plate. All right, it could be trapped for basically hours, and then it is going to represent or be representative of our latent image. So the electrons that are returned back, well, let me say, in order to get those electrons to return back to their stable state, they basically have to be stimulated by additional light. So it's basically a process of light stimulation and emission within that PSP plate when it's exposed by a laser light. And that laser light is inside of our plate reader. All right, so again, one term to definitely be familiar with is PSP, or photostimulable phosphor, and that's that phosphor that produces light when it's stimulated by light or X-ray photons. And then another thing that you need to be aware of is that your photostimulable phosphors, where they're located in the imaging plate, again, they are in the active layer, and they are composed of barium fluorohalide, and then we talked about europium activated earlier. All right, we've gone and we've taken our patient's x-rays, and as a result, now, once that image is acquired in the imaging plate, we would handle it in the same manner as we would a film screen cassette, which you guys aren't familiar with, but some of you are familiar with CR plate. So basically, we have to take it to a reader in order to extract the information out of it. So if we were talking about the film screen world, we would take the cassette and we would either take it in the dark room and manually extract the film, place it on the place it in the processor, and then it would come out on the outside after it's gone through the fixer tank, washer tank, developer tank, fixer tank, washer or rinse tank, and then the dryer dropped down for us. Then we got fancy and we came up with daylight processors. So now instead of going into the dark room, it's kind of like the CR readers. We would place the plate inside the daylight processor. The actual processor would extract the film for us, so it's no longer manual. It would extract the film and of course replace it with a new film, and it would spit back out our cassette, and then we would still have to wait for the film to go through the developer tank, to the fixer tank, to the rinse tank, and then through the dryer, and then it would drop out for us. So the PSP plate is similar to that. We have different types of readers. It can be a single plate reader, or the reader can have multiple shelves. It can be a vertical type reader, or it can be a parallel type reader, meaning the way the way in which it scans. So your PSP plate itself is not loaded in the darkroom. The machine itself is going to extract the plate, and it's going to read off the information, and then it's going to put the plate back in after it's been completely erased. So it's similar to what we considered our daylight processors back, I'll say back in the day. But all right, so now we are moving into objective number 4. All right, and objective number 4 was explain the process of reading and erasing the imaging plate. So there's two types of PSP readers. We have point scan readers and we have line scan readers. All right, and this is a multi-reader. This is Fuji in nature, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. And then if you go into the X-ray lab itself, underneath the computer screen where we have those student pictures flashing, you'll see a single reader, an older version of Fuji, but it only read one plate at a time. All right, so this slide is talking just about your point scan readers. So with your point scan readers, we have a single laser point scans or scans at a point at a particular time. All right, we're not going to get into all the, I'll say the weeds of it, but it just scans basically that one laser is going to scan that entire plate one point at a time. All right, the next type is your line scan reader, and your line scan reader basically scans an entire line at a time. All right, now we're talking about processing the, the image or the latent image. So after you've taken your patient's x-rays or after the exposure, you're going to feed your CR cassette into the reader. All right, the reader itself is going to extract that imaging plate or that PSP plate from the cassette, and it's going to scan it with a laser. All right, it has to scan it with the laser in order to release those electrons that are trapped in that active layer or trapped within the PSP plate. All right, that laser light is going to scan across the imaging plate. All right, we call that fast scan when it scans across the imaging plate as the plate moves through the reader. When the plate is moving through the reader itself, we call that slow scan. So it's going to slowly move through the processor and the laser is going to scan across it. All right, again, when your CR cassette is placed in your CR reader, the imaging plate is going to be removed or extracted from the cassette, and it's going to be basically sent through the machine with a precision drive mechanism. So precision meaning precise. It has to be precise. So that drive mechanism is going to move that IP plate at a very slow and constant speed along the long axis of that imaging plate. If we were to have changes in that speed occur during the process of trying to extract that image, it could result in an artifact, and that artifact is called a banding artifact, and it would display on the image. So if you ever see any, I'll say, artifacts on your CR images, sometimes it could be a plate reader artifact. Sometimes it could be a regular artifact, but then sometimes it could be a plate reader artifact. So during that slow scan transport, basically there's a deflection device inside of the machine, and it acts basically like an oscillating mirror. It deflects our laser beam across that imaging plate, again in that process called fast scan. Some of the mechanical features and drives within our CR reader are coupled to our laser optical features of that CR reader. When we say couple, mean link to. The CR readers, again, um, if they're, I'll say, out of tolerance or not properly working correctly, it could present, again, different types of artifacts on your images, such as wavy edges. So again, our CR and DR images can have artifacts that are as a result of the reader, the plate reader. All right, now we're still looking kind of inside of our processor. So this is the actual laser that's reading or scanning our cassette. So the components inside of the processor that are involved are, we have an optical subsystem, and that includes the laser. There are beam shaping optics. So basically we have to ensure that it is in a correct, coming out in a correct shape. We have light collecting optics, because remember, as we're releasing these electrons, they are going to produce light, and those light collecting optics are going to capture that light. We have optical filters, and then of course we have a photodetector inside as well. So as the plate moves forward in our CR reader, you'll have a small laser beam projected onto that phosphor layer or the active layer. The laser beam is the diameter of that laser beam, because it has to be shaped appropriately, is going to be critical in making sure that our images present with high spatial resolution. When we talk about spatial resolution, we're talking about the detail in our image. The laser itself, that it the energy that it has is going to assist in releasing those trapped electrons. Again, we have electrons that are trapped in that active layer. And as those electrons fall back down to their stable state, they're going to release energy. All right. And that energy is going to be released in a form of light. All right. That light energy is then going to be directed towards that photodetector via it could be one of the coupling things, could be a fiber optic bundle. Um, Before that photodetector captures that light, or before photodetection occurs, the light is filtered. All right, all right, it's filtered to, I guess, how would I say this? Like when we filter something, we're filtering out what we would consider bad. So some of those wavelengths of light that are produced during that stimulation, we won't include that in the image. So it's going to go through the filter to filter out what it considers bad light before it reaches that photodetector. All right, the photodetector itself is then going to convert that filtered light that it receives, or that filtered energy that it receives, into your electronic signal. And that electronic signal is then going to be sent to your computer for processing and display. All right, and this is kind of what we just talked about. All right, so now this is kind of a look at the inside, or what's happening as your plate is moved through the actual reader. All right, so again, it has to be very precise. We can't have any fluctuations. All right, that laser beam is going to pass, that scanner laser light is going to scan over your actual cassette, and it's going to release light. All right, that light is going to be shaped and directed towards your photo detector. All right, this is just again telling you about the process. As the cassette goes into the reader, it's going to take the PSP plate out or extract it. The plate is going to be scanned with the laser light. All right, and it's just telling you basically the shape or the width of that and wavelength of that laser beam. All right, so it's 100 micrometers with a wavelength of 633 nanometers. All right, so again, it's telling you about the process. The reader is going to scan the plate with that red laser light in a zigzag pattern. Another name for this pattern is a raster pattern. The laser is going to assist with releasing those trapped electrons. All right, and this is just showing you again as the plate is moving through the reader how the actual laser is scanning it. And as it's scanning it, it's releasing the light. All right, again, we're still talking about the process itself. It's saying as your imaging plate moves through your reader, again, it's going to be scanned. Um, as the laser scans across it in that raster pattern, that scanning across it, we call that translation. All right, so it's basically translating what it's receiving. As a result of being scanned, as it releases those trapped electrons back down to the stable state, it's going to release a light energy that will be captured and eventually sent to our photodetector. The photodetector is going to amplify that light, meaning make it brighter, and it's going to send it to your ADC or your analog to digital converter. So basically, we're going to take that analog light signal and then we're going to convert it into a digital signal. And that digital signal, again, is going to assist in showing us those images on your computer screen. All right, again, this is still just talking about the process itself, and it's just telling you more in detail as the laser is moving across the plate back and forth. It's saying it's similar to holding a flashlight at the same height and moving it back and forth across a wall. However, of course, this is with more precision than we would do it. All right, it needs to be precise because any inconsistencies that it detects is going to affect the image with regard to its detail. So again, inside we have those beam shaping optics, and it's going to keep that beam size and shape as well as the speed very precise throughout the process of the extraction of the data or the image. All right, inside again, this is just talking about some of the components inside your reader. You have that beam deflector. You have mirrors, and of course, it's talking about the type of phosphor material in your imaging plate and how everything inside is designed to work together in order to produce your diagnostic image. All right, last but not least, before we get to just basically a one last view of the plate within the reader, Um, there's different types of manufacturers. Um, Depending on the type of reader that you've purchased, it can produce, or I'll say not produce, process up to 50 cassettes per hour. And they say that some manufacturers say that their machines can process up to 100 cassettes per hour. So based on how busy your department is, um, will determine what type of machine you would have needed to purchase. Like our single readers, like the one that we have in our x-ray lab, would not be the type of reader that you would want to see in a busy hospital, because you're sitting there waiting, kind of similar to, I guess it is similar to what you would do if you were waiting on someone in the dark room. It's processing one, well, I guess everything's always processing one plate at a time, but one plate at a time versus me being able to push multiple plates in and go on and do my business and then come back. So if you are the manager who has oversight of what type of equipment to purchase, this is one thing that you would want to keep in mind with regard to the workflow. You wouldn't want to purchase something that's going to slow the workflow down within your department. All right, and this is just the last look at what happens as your machine is being your cassette is being processed. It's showing you the direction in which the cassette is placed. It's showing you the fast scan and the slow scan direction, or the translation of it. It's showing you how the light is released, then placed through the optical filter prior to being sent to the photo detector, because it only wants certain, I'll say, certain intensities of light to get through. All right, now we're moving on to objective number 6. And objective number 6 was compare conventional radiographic screen and film speed with your PSP systems. So the signal that is outputted by your photodetectors is basically a time varying analog signal. So the signal is processed for its amplitude, its scale, and its compression. And these measurements basically are going to shape the signal before that final image is formed. All right, then that analog signal will be digitized through, again, if you go back to the previous slides, your ADC, or your analog to digital converter, where the values for each signal or each sample is going to be quantified, and the time between each sample is going to be measured. With that digital signal is going to be sent to what we consider an image buffer, and an image buffer is basically an area, usually a hard drive, that stores your completed image temporarily before it transfers it to the workstation for interpretation and archival. When I say interpretation, meaning the radiologist reading it or you viewing it, and then archival means where it is actually stored long term. All right, these terms, right, some of these terms should be familiar to you. So in this particular slide, it's talking about your matrix. All right, and your matrix is an array or rows or columns or squares that we call pixels. All right, these pixels will record our brightness levels. If you think back to, I think, physics 1 or 2, we talked about pixels, and we said if you purchase a phone and we're talking about the camera on the phone, we would want the phone or a camera that has the most pixels. So when we talk about matrix size, as your matrix size decreases, so will your number of pixels. And the less pixels we have, the less spatial resolution we're going to be able to get within that image. And we're talking about spatial resolution. Again, the old term for that is detail. As our matrix size increases, the more pixels we're going to have within that matrix, and also the smaller those pixels are going to be, and that is going to result in increased spatial resolution or increased detail for that image. All right, again, this should be somewhat a review. So if we're talking about the squares of a matrix, so again, if we're talking about a matrix, let's say we got a checkerboard here, this would be your matrix. These individual squares, again, we're going to call those pixels or picture elements. That's, again, this is a review. Each pixel has a bit depth. Again, that's a review term. And that bit depth is going to determine how many shades of gray, are able to be presented within that image. So the larger your bit depth, the more shades of gray we'll have available to create our images. So again, bit depth determines how many shades of gray that system has. All right, and then everything is in a base 2, and we'll get to that on the next slide. But again, I don't know if you guys remember from last semester, but again, the matrix size determines the number of pixels, and we can determine how many pixels the matrix has by multiplying the matrix size. So if we're talking about 512 by 512, if we multiply that together, how many pixels would you have? I'll give you just a second to figure that out, and then I'll write it on the board. All right, it would have 262,144 pixels. All right, again, if we did 1024 by 1024 and then 2,500 by 2,500, multiply those together and you get the number of pixels that that matrix would have. I'm not going to do those ones. You can do those on your own. But we would love to have the greatest number of pixels. So the larger the matrix size, the more pixels you're going to have, and then again, the greater the spatial resolution of that image. All right, moving on. So we talked about the number of pixels. So now we're talking a little bit in depth, more in depth about the bit depth. We said that the bit depth, depth, how do we say that word? Determines how many shades of gray there are. And if you're trying to determine how many shades of gray, we talked about everything being in a base 2. So if we have 2 to the 8th, or a bit depth of 8, we have 256 shades of gray available to assign to a radiographic image. Let's say we had a bit depth of 2. All right, not a very good system. So 2 to the 2nd power, we would only have 4 shades of gray available to assign to our image. So not going to be a great image there. All right, we already did a bit depth of 8, but let's say we had a bit depth of 6. All right, 2 to the 6, we're going to have only 64 shades of gray available to assign to those individual pixels or the individual image. All right, some other bit depths that you might see out there are 2 to the 12th and 2 to the 14th. You can do those on your own, but 2 to the 12th, you're going to have 4,096 shades of gray available to assign to your image. All right, so spatial resolution. Why do you care about spatial resolution? And what is an older term that we learned back in Physics 2 for spatial resolution? So spatial resolution, we're talking about the detail that our images have. All right, again, the pixels and their sizes are going to determine how much detail is seen within our image. So for film screen, they say that film screen, the detail is way better than the detail that PSP plates give us. We're just going to have to take them at their word because we don't have that technology. You guys won't get to work with that technology unless you're extremely lucky or unlucky and find yourself in a probably a remote location in a small doctor's office or a small hospital where they don't see fit to spend the money to go digital. All right, here's two images from your book. On the left one, it says that this is an image that was produced with film screen. And on the right, they say that this is an image that was produced with a PSP plate. So basically your CR technology. So if you look at these images in greater detail, on the left, you can see more detail. However, you can't see um, the fat pads that you see on your PSP image. All right, and fat pads, um, not sure if you know, but fat pads tell us that it might indicate that there's a possible fracture there. All right. On the right, the one that is produced with our CR technology, although we have less detail or less bony trabeculae that you see in this first image, you can see the fat pads. And again, because we have so many shades of gray available, it's able to distinguish, um, I won't say in greater detail, but it's able to distinguish those fat pads in greater detail that that film screen technology didn't give us. All right, to wrap it all up, this is talking about, the spatial resolution and basically um, the greater number of shades of gray we have or the greater bit depth, the better the resolution is going to be. I guess I said that. I said that backwards. It says it makes it more difficult to see the resolution or discern between the resolution. And then it goes back to that example of fat pads. Okay, I get it. I get it because it did say that film screen gives us better detail. So that's where that's coming from. But even though it gives us better detail, we're not able to see things such as fat pads um, that you would be able to see with CR. All right, moving on. Now we're talking about erasing the image, or how do those PSP plates get erased? So basically, we have that laser that scans the plate. It's going to release most of those trapped electrons back to the stable state as it's extracting the actual image that we need. All right, even though it releases the majority of those trapped electrons, some of them do not get released. So in order to completely erase our PSP plate, what the machine does is it floods it with light. A best practice also with our PSP plates is to erase them. There is a button on the machine that you can select that will just erase it. You don't want to process it, you just want it to be erased. So one of the things that we notice with our CR technology is it is sensitive to background energy or background radiation. And with that being said, as it sits over a period of time, you might notice what they call ghost images. So just the regular background energies can assist with bringing some of the previous images that were scanned or taken on the cassettes back. So a best practice, because of the background radiation and because of scatter, is to completely erase all of your CR cassettes weekly. A good time to erase them would be, especially if you're in a location where you don't work over the weekends, as soon as you come in at the beginning of the week, you would want to erase all of the plates before you would start using them on patients. All right, so now we're going to go into basically the erasing process itself. All right, so again, I said there was a button that you would press that simply is going to just erase that PSP plate. We don't need it red. We just want to clean up all the scatter. All right, the plate will be extracted. It's going to flood that plate with white light. That white light is going to assist in removing any remaining trapped electrons. And I stated that this was good practice to erase these plates periodically, especially if you're in a location where they're not used often. All right, now we're going to move into basically pre-processing, processing, and forwarding the image. So basically, after your plate is scanned, what happens to the image? After the plate is scanned, that signal that it receives is going to be sent to your computer for pre-processing. All right, so what that means is the computer is going to do the best job it can to pre-process that image and present to you the best possible image based on the body part that was selected, the histogram that is stored in the system for that particular body part, and the technique that you decided to use for that patient's image. All right, once it's done with pre-processing, it's going to display the image to you for review. And at that time, you can manipulate it as you feel necessary. Meaning maybe you need to put a letter marker on it, maybe you need to annotate on it, maybe you need to make it lighter or darker, etc. And then after that, after you've done everything you need to do with it, you will send it to the PAC system for storage. All right, now we're moving on to objective number 6. And objective number 6 was to discuss the importance of matching the body part being examined. All right, so part selection. So in most places now, you are selecting the body part you want to be imaged, meaning you're selecting chest, PHS, lateral chest, um, wrist, skull, etc. All right, you want to make sure that the body part is selected correctly and is processed under the right algorithm or histogram within the system. All right, if we don't do this correctly, then it's not going to be able to match it to the stored histogram to present to you the best image possible. So again, you want to always ensure that as you are, if you're using, well, actually, if you're using any type of technology, that you are any type of digital technology, selecting the right body part that's going to be x-rayed on that particular image receptor. All right, and this is just a look at a menu Your part selection at the top, of course, you can see it goes through the body parts, chest, head, abdomen, spine, pelvis, etc. And then as each main menu is selected, it'll give you a drop down of what body parts are available. So of course, the one that's selected here is your head, and it shows you every item that falls under the head menu, which is skull. We're more talking about the bones of the head, facial bones, sinuses, orbits, etc. Of course, if we select any of the other top menus, the drop-down menu would change per the menu header. And again, you all are in clinic, so this should be familiar to you. All right, again with part selection, basically we're talking about image recognition. So image recognition becomes or is basically an important step for you all. So the right body part should always be selected on the panel, and the right body part should also be imaged. With that being said, the right technique should always be used, and of course, the right amount of collimation should always be employed. And if we fail to do any of those things, it could affect the way our image presents on our actual monitor. So I know at your ortho places you may not collimate as closely as you should, um, but actually not doing that does affect how your image actually looks. All right, so basically, what we mean by part selection means that you shouldn't select skull on your control panel and perform a knee, all right, because it looks better. If your images don't look good, then you should probably, if you're kind of like the first line of defense, you should probably have your system service as soon as possible. All right, practicing that is going to basically if we're selecting skull to do a knee or chest to do a knee or whatever the case may be, that practice can potentially lead to unnecessary patient exposure because you're if we're not changing the technique, then we might not be practicing a LAR. The technique we're using might be higher than it should be. All right, this is moving into objective number 7. So objective number 7 was to discuss the selection of technical factors for density. All right, the new term for density, if you remember back, is brightness. The term density is the blackness on your film. Contrast and penetration. Contrast, we're talking about our shades of gray. Penetration, we're talking about if our technique is going to be high enough to penetrate the actual body part. So again, you should select the right technique based on a LAR. So what is a LAR? All right, that's just a question for you to ponder on. You should know what a LAR is. Um, Going all the way back to your intro class, as low as reasonably achievable, meaning we want to use the lowest technique possible in order to produce that patient's image. All right, the KVP has to be high enough to penetrate the body part or the tissue type. All right, and again, the mass should be, I'll say, low enough because you know that mass actually controls patient dose, as low as possible to, I guess, reduce the patient's dose. All right, with regard to KVP selection, all right, we want to have the right KVP. The right KVP should be used, all right, and then you guys are familiar with your procedures book. It does point out some roundabout or starting KVPs for each particular body part. It doesn't really go into mass, however, it tells you that for this particular body part, you want to have a KVP within this range. And it's saying if you have this KVP, that KVP should be high enough to penetrate the body part. But when we talk about penetrate the body part, we're talking about that average male patient. All right, you have to take a look at different body habitus, the body habitus, because if it's a more muscular person or an obese person or let's say a stenic or astenic person, you may want to decrease your KVP, just depending on what body part you're looking at. So using high KVPs, which is something that is recommended, will assist us in decreasing the patient's dose because if we're using high KVP, we can potentially decrease the mass that we want to use. All right, the trade-off though, when you're using a high KVP will increase your scatter. All right, and scatter, if we're in the room, that's going to increase our patient dose as the technologist. All right, the other side of KVP. If your KVP is too low, no matter how much mass we have, all right, we can continue to pump up that mass as much as we want on the repeat. If the KVP is too low, it's not going to be able to penetrate that body part. All right, one of the things that we can use to identify whether or not our KVP was too low, we talked about quantum model or quantum noise. All right, and the only way to fix quantum model or quantum noise, which quantum looks, it makes your image look grainy. The only way to fix that is to repeat the image. And of course, you do need a higher technique, specifically a higher KVP. You didn't have enough energy to penetrate your patient's body part or the selected body part. All right, with film screen, and again, you guys don't have the pleasure of working with film screen. Um, the images that we see are going to be solely dependent on our KVP and mass, meaning the KVP, we already know that KVP controls the strength of our beam and the contrast. We know that the mass controls the number of photons within that X-ray beam, which also controls the density or the darkness that we see on our image. All right, so with film screen, we don't have a wide latitude. We don't have that wide dynamic range that we have with digital imaging, whether it be CR or DR. So film screen, what you see is what you get. If it's too dark, it's a repeat. If it's too light, it's a repeat. You guys have the luxury of working with CR and DR, so due to the wide dynamic range or the wide latitude, and that should be a review of a term, and also the pre-processing capabilities of your systems and the post-processing capabilities of your system, the contrast is no longer solely dependent on KVP. Now we have the computer that is able to assist us with the processing. So what we thought in the film screen world was too light or too dark, now instead of repeating it, even if it's outside of our EI numbers, we can potentially use that post-processing, meaning that window and level tool to make our image lighter or darker, as long as we're not grossly overexposed, meaning our image has its saturated, meaning the contrast just looks weird, or grossly underexposed, meaning we have that noise in the image. It's a grainy image, and the only thing we can do to fix both of those is to repeat the image. Well, it looks like the recording is still there. So I think it's still there. So I'll go over these last couple slides and then I will stop the recording and start a new one as we go into objective number 8. All right, so we left off before my computer kind of died, and hopefully this is still recording, with your KVP selection. The last thing we're going to talk about before we move into objective number 8 is your MA selection. So basically, your mass is still going to be important in your CR and DR imaging or your digital imaging. If your image receptor